In 1960, national service had ended, and so had the first flush of rock and roll, which was replaced by anemic coffee bar rockers. Carlo Little had just finished his stint of national service and remembers his first meeting with Dave Sutch.
This weird-looking guy came through the cafe door, hair slicked back like Tarzan, grease, looked quite long, and he had a pair of goggles, motorbike goggles, but there was no glass in them. Look at that weird guy, and he's strange. We had a lot in common because of the music, the rock and roll.
They were to be collaborators in a succession of great bands, although in the beginning Sutch was just an interested spectator.
We were rehearsing one night, and I said to the guitar player, look, why don't you do a sort of screaming solo? You know, just go for it, you know, really give us an attitude and have a go. We're all new to the business. And in the solo he went, woo, like that. Everyone went, right, and Dave Sutch, who was just sort of there, hanging around at the time, went, wow, and he threw his head forward in excitement, and it all came down, his hair, about 18 inches long. And he was going mad, you know, with his head and all that, and we all rolled up. I said, Dave, I said, this is incredible, you've got to be the singer. He said, I'm going to call myself Screaming Lord Sutch. I said, okay, let's think of a good name for the band. I said, it's wild and it's savage. I said, yes, the Savages. Screaming Lord Sutch and the Savages. And so that's how it was born.
Shake, oh baby, shake, we're begging.
Once on the road, Sutch began to really evolve his act, stealing the glitz of the wrestling ring and musical, and taking ideas from another Two Eyes original, Wee Willie Harris. He created the first rock and roll show band.
Every song, we had to think of a prop to go with that song. For instance, blue suede shoes, he'd find an old junk shop and find a pair of army boots size 14 or something and paint them gloss blue. Then he saw a toilet seat in a junk shop. He said, that'd be good round my head.
How about that? Have a look in the mirror.
They were often running with a new kind of act that can only be described as rock and horror. Sutch also began to discover important musicians. That first band included guitarist Bernie Watson and classically trained Nicky Hopkins, who later recorded with the Stones and the Beatles, and set the standard for a succession of savages, most of which had drummer Carlo Little forcing the beat.
But wherever we played, there would be 10 guitar players watching the guitarist, 10 drummers watching me, 10 watching him, and the rest watching Sutch.
Once Sutch was arrested after the audience set upon him when he fired a gun at them as part of the act. Carlo, as always, followed him to the local nick.
As I was talking to Dave, well, I couldn't see him, he was round the corner, I was fiddling in my pocket with this starting pistol, and it had a hair trigger, and it went bang in my pocket, and I went, oh Christ, and all smoke was coming out, and all the police came rushing at me from the cells, and all God knows everywhere, and it was going like this. I was going, what? So I was smoking that. You could hear Dave laughing. Is that you? Is that my gun going off? And all that sort of thing. Phone George. When you leave here, phone George, whatever you do. This guy, George, who got him the publicity in the first place. From then on, every gig was solidly packed.
Returning to England in 1973, he appeared with all his rock and roll heroes at Wembley. Billy Fury, Little Richard, Bill Haley, Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry. But it was Sutch, with his flair for publicity, who made the news headlines in the TV stations.
He hired a stripper and she got her front out, and of course that sort of stole the show. He dyed his hair green. I said, what the hell are you doing dyeing your hair green? He said, well, rock and roll's evergreen, so...
Depression appeared far from his mind when he took to the stage for the last time with Carlo Little and his all-star band.
Little letter, gonna mail it to my local DJ. lover than a real rocket. Rolling over than a move on up. I'm lover than a real rocket. One another roll.
Just 5 days later, Yvonne was confident enough to leave him to clear out his mother's house.
I went in the afternoon and I opened the door, I had a key, I opened the door, and I could see him at the top of the stairs, and it looked as though, at first I didn't realise what he was doing, and it looked as though he was standing at the top of the stairs, and it looked almost as though he had makeup on because he was so pale. I said, David, what are you doing? And he didn't answer, and it was only as I got, to the end of them, I could see that he was dead, that he was hanging.
Today, flowers have been laid outside the home where David Sutch was found hanged, apparently the victim of suicide.
I was devastated, the same as everybody else was. Just couldn't believe, not of Dave, because I didn't know there was anything wrong.
He made his living from publicity. He would have loved to have seen himself on all the front pages. It's tragic, isn't it?
Everybody had that feeling that the coffin lid was going to open up and Dave was going to come out and sort of jump over and say, "Have you ever been had?" or something like that.
When the shade of night is falling and the moon is shining bright in the center of the graveyard, in the middle of the night, I get out of my grave, I pick a long black coffin till the falling night.